The forest spoke in breaths, not words. Pines leaned toward one another like old widows sharing secrets, their needles whispering as the wind combed through them. Snow fell in patient beads, soft as ash from a tired fire, and the world seemed to tighten its lungs and hold. A boy moved through that hush, a small figure in a too-big coat, boots gnawing the crust of ice with each step. He did not know where the path ended or where a new one might begin. He only knew the habit of forward. He counted his steps when the fear came, counting as his mother once taught him to steady a trembling mind. 1 to remember, 2 to breathe, 3 to look, 4 to pray. The rhythm kept his thoughts gathered like twine around a bundle of sticks. When he stopped to listen, the quiet had textures. A faint creak somewhere under a lid of ice, the brittle rattle of dry grasses trapped beneath snow, the distant bark of a dog that was not his. Cold touched his face with an ancient hand. He set his jaw and moved on. The sky was the color of a bruise turning to dusk. In the pocket of his coat, wrapped in cloth, a photograph traveled with him. It had rounded corners and a crease that split a smile in two. Sometimes he dared to open it, but not today. Wind pressed at his back and pushed a smell toward him. Old wood and smoke, the shadow of a fire long dead. He raised his head. Between the fir trunks, half-sunken drifts, a shape revealed itself. At first it looked like a boulder shouldered in snow. Then the ridgeline of a roof appeared, slumped but loyal, and the mouth of a dark doorway gaped like a cave. A cabin, tucked where the hill bent to hide it from the road. Its shingles were scabbed with lichen. Its window blinked a single unbroken pane of glass, pale as a blind eye. The boy felt the ache in his legs stand up and speak. Shelter. Even the word warmed his tongue. Still, he waited. The forest had taught him that not every quiet place wished him well. He listened for footsteps, for the clatter of a latch, for the cough of someone sleeping inside. Only the pines answered, their needles hissing when the wind grew curious. He lifted his scarf over his nose and edged forward, feeling the powder collapse beneath his ankles and flood his boots. At the door he paused, touched the rough plank with the back of his knuckles as if greeting a horse. The wood was cold, but it did not flinch. Inside, winter had erected its own furniture. Icy lace crawled along the inner windows, and frost glazed the iron of a small stove. The air tasted of sap and damp ashes. A chair lay on its side like a fallen soldier. A broom leaned against a corner where mouse tracks stitched neat lines. The boy stood very still. His breath braided itself with the dust motes, and he thought he could hear, under everything, the faintest memory of human voices, the ghost sound that rooms keep after many winters. He closed the door to its latch, and the wind fell away like a heavy curtain. Silence gathered. He took off his gloves and blew into his hands, cupping them until the sting eased. Boards complained beneath his feet when he stepped, the sound as thin as an old violin. On the table, a chipped bowl held the husk of a walnut. He put it to his nose. It still remembered oil and sweetness. Nearby, a bundle of birch twigs lay tied with rough string, and a stump of candle slept in a rusted tin. He did not light it. Not yet. He would not waste what he could not replace. He explored with his eyes first, the way a fisherman studies ice for cracks. Against the wall stood a narrow bed whose quilt had stiffened into a landscape of frozen hills. He pinched the edge and found a softness still trapped within, faint as breath. He pulled the quilt around his shoulders and sat on the floor by the stove, a pilgrim at an iron altar. His stomach reached up like a small animal from a burrow and complained. He broke a corner from the hard bread in his bag. It tasted of patience and stone. The cabin scent changed as his body warmed the air. Old smoke woke in the fibers. Pine pitch lifted in a thin medicinal thread. He pressed fingers to the stove's door, feeling the numbness sting back to life. He pictured a flame and tried to hold it until even his imagination gave off heat. In the corner, a line of boot hooks watched him like black birds. One hook, lower than the others, had been bent by smaller hands. He thought of a child who once stood there, stamping snow from shoes while a mother scolded gently, while a father laughed and shook his cap like a wet dog. He closed his eyes and heard it, their laughter, so clear he turned to look. No one was there. Only the broom, the bowl, the quiet. Only the faithful bones of a house that had learned to keep a secret. Beyond the walls, the wind flexed and settled. He reached again for the photograph, touched the cloth as if it were skin. "I'm still walking," he whispered, unsure whether he spoke to the face in the picture or to God. Perhaps both. He pressed his palm flat on the floor and felt the grain running like rivers beneath a map. He was not lost exactly, he told himself. He was being led. If stories like this touch your heart, please subscribe and tell us where you're listening from. It is our dream to reach 1,000 hearts hearing these tales. He folded the quilt tighter and lay his cheek to the fabric. Through chinks in the boards, night stole its way inside, not cruelly, only certain. The pines murmured blessings or warnings. He could not tell which. He answered them by breathing, counting, praying in small syllables that matched the pulse in his throat. Somewhere in the belly of the house something ticked. A settling nail, a mouse, the aftersound of a life once lived here. He listened as a student listens to a lesson he hopes is true. A cabin is a mouth, he thought, that either eats a traveler or feeds him. He could not yet know which kind this was. He only knew that for the first time in many days, a door had closed behind him and stayed closed, and the snow had stopped reaching for his feet, and the cold spared a corner of his bones. He lay awake and watched the faint window lighten with moon, finding shapes in the frost the way children study clouds. A ship, a dove, a hand raised in blessing. Beneath the bed, the dark held its breath. When morning came, it did not arrive in color. The light that bled through the frost was gray, thin as water poured through cloth. The forest beyond the cabin walls had turned to silence again. Not the soft kind that comforts, but the one that watches. The boy woke with his breath visible, his fingers stiff around the edge of the quilt. The small stove, empty and hollow, waited like an open mouth. He rose slowly, his joints whispering like paper. Hunger was the first thing that spoke to him each morning. Not with pain, he was used to that, but with a dull insistence that made the world tilt slightly toward despair. He pressed his ear to the wall. The wind sighed like a tired mother outside. Snowflakes tapped the glass in uncertain rhythms. He thought of the camp, the others, the lines of people walking with no map except the promise that somewhere there would be warmth. He had been with them once, before the storm scattered their footprints. He remembered the woman who gave him half her scarf, saying, "Keep this, you'll find the road by the smell of pine." Now he had the pine, but no road. The boy crouched beside the stove. In its belly, ashes glimmered faintly like the eyes of small ghosts. He sifted them with a stick, hoping for coal that still remembered fire. One ember blinked. He smiled, just a corner of his mouth, the way he used to when his mother caught him stealing crumbs. Carefully, he fed the ember with dry bark peeled from a beam. Smoke began to rise, hesitant, then certain. The flame woke with a crackle that sounded almost like laughter. He whispered, "Thank you." The warmth spread slowly, crawling across the floor like dawn across a field. His hands, once the color of old paper, blushed again. He rubbed them together, feeling life return finger by finger. The bread he had left was nearly gone. He broke it in two, half for now, half for later, and chewed each bite as though memorizing it. Then he wandered to the window. Outside, the forest had buried its own footsteps. The trees stood as guardians, their arms heavy with snow. In the distance, smoke rose faintly from somewhere, a thin gray vein against the white sky. The boy's heart stumbled at the sight. Smoke meant people, and people meant either danger or salvation. He waited, staring until his eyes burned. But the smoke vanished, or perhaps the world swallowed it whole. When he turned, the cabin looked different. Smaller, lonelier, older. The shadows stretched longer, bending over him like memories he did not ask to remember. He began to explore again, touching things softly, as though afraid they might vanish. On a shelf, he found a tin cup, a wooden spoon, and a small, cracked mirror. He picked it up. The face that looked back was not the boy he remembered. His cheeks were hollow, his eyes enormous, the kind that have seen too much winter for their years. Still, there was something unbroken in the gaze, a stubborn ember that refused to die. He set the mirror down carefully and sat by the window again. The day passed without sound. Time here was not measured by clocks, but by the rhythm of the fire dying and being born again. At dusk, when the light turned the color of pewter, he heard something move outside, the crunch of snow, deliberate and close. He froze. His breath caught in his chest. Another sound, a low whine. He rose slowly, went to the door, and lifted the latch. The cold rushed in like a wave. A dog stood there, thin, limping, its fur matted with ice, its ribs drawing maps of survival under its skin. It looked at him with eyes too human for the silence between them. The boy stepped back. The dog hesitated, then entered, tail tucked low. Its smell was wild, earth, hunger, and storm. For a long time, they simply stared at each other. Then the boy broke the last of his bread, crumbled it on the floor, and whispered, "Here." The dog ate with desperate gratitude, its body shaking not from fear but relief. When it finished, it curled beside the stove, sighing as though it had waited its whole life for this one patch of warmth. The boy smiled again, this time with both corners of his mouth. He sat beside the animal, resting his palm lightly on its back, feeling the heartbeat beneath fur. Two survivors, sharing the same small fire. Outside, the snow began again, soft, endless, patient. The world was still cruel, still cold, but inside that cabin, something gentle had been born, something that did not need words to be understood. The boy looked into the flames and thought, maybe I wasn't meant to die alone. The pines outside whispered their lullaby, bending under the weight of mercy. The boy lay down beside the dog, both of them wrapped in the same warm quilt. The fire whispered in its tongue of orange light. Before sleep took him, he whispered to the ceiling, "Thank you for the fire and for the friend." And for the first time in many nights, his prayer did not vanish into the dark. It stayed, like warmth in the bones of the cabin. When the boy awoke, the fire had died down to whispers. Pale light leaned through the window, slow and uncertain, as if it feared to disturb him. For a moment, he did not remember where he was. Only the smell of ash, the faint warmth on his cheek, and the soft rhythm of breathing beside him. The dog. It was still there, coiled like a shadow against the stove, its fur now dry and soft. Its ribs rose and fell like waves in a faraway sea. When the boy moved, one of its eyes opened, amber and alive. It studied him without fear. "Good morning," the boy said softly, though his voice sounded strange to him, too human after so many days of silence. The dog stretched, shook, and then came closer. Its tail brushed his knee once, uncertain but hopeful. The boy laughed quietly, and the sound startled him. It had been so long since laughter had lived in his throat that he'd forgotten how it felt. He decided to name the dog Ash, after the fire that had saved them both. Ash followed him as he explored more of the cabin that day. The place seemed larger now, not in space, but in mystery. Dust caught the light and floated like snow suspended in air. The smell of old timber and forgotten smoke hung heavy, a perfume of ghosts and time. There were 2 rooms. The front one held the stove, table, and bed. The second, smaller, was hidden behind a crooked door. Its handle was stiff with rust. The boy hesitated before pushing it open. The door sighed as though relieved to be remembered. Inside, the air was colder. A shelf leaned against the far wall, burdened by books swollen with damp. A pair of boots rested by a stool. The boy crouched and touched them. The leather cracked but still strong. Someone had once lived here. Someone who left in a hurry, or perhaps never left at all. On the windowsill, he found a wooden bird carved from pine. It had no wings, only a smooth body and a beak pointing upward. He turned it over in his palm, tracing the worn edges where fingers had once held it often. A child's toy, he thought. Ash sniffed around the floorboards and whined softly near the bed. The boy bent down and saw a gap beneath it, wide enough to hide something. He reached under, the cold wood scraping his knuckles, and his fingers touched metal. He pulled. A small drawer slid free, hidden in the shadow of the bed frame. Its handle was carved with a cross. The boy's heart began to thud. Inside the drawer lay an old Bible, its cover cracked and soft as bark. Beneath it, a folded paper, yellowed and tied with a thin thread. He untied it carefully, afraid it might fall apart in his hands. The words were written in ink faded to brown. "To whoever finds this, you are not forgotten." He stared at the sentence for a long time, unable to breathe. The world seemed to narrow until it was only that piece of paper, trembling in his hands. He opened the Bible next. Between its pages, dried flowers lay pressed like small prayers turned to dust. Margins were filled with careful notes, verses underlined, thoughts written in looping handwriting. Ash pressed his head against the boy's leg as if sensing the gravity of the moment. He read aloud, his voice slow, uncertain. "The Lord is near to the brokenhearted and saves those who are crushed in spirit." His throat tightened. He had heard those words before. Once, long ago, when his mother whispered them over his fevered head during the war. Her voice had trembled, not from doubt, but from the hope that trembles before it becomes faith. The boy closed the book and pressed it to his chest. The smell of its old paper and dust filled his lungs, and for a moment, it was as if he could breathe her in again. He carried the Bible and the letter to the table, set them beside the dying fire, and sat in silence. The air felt heavier now, full of presence, not haunting but holy. Maybe someone had lived here who also waited, who also prayed, who also believed that kindness could outlive the people who gave it. The boy looked around the cabin and saw it differently. The walls were no longer walls. They were arms that had held someone's dreams. The stove wasn't just iron. It was a heart that once burned with warmth. Even the creaking boards seemed to speak softly, as if saying, "We remember." Ash settled beside him. The boy placed his hand on the dog's back and whispered, "We're not forgotten, you hear me?" The dog's tail brushed against the floor, a quiet amen. Outside, the forest sighed under a new snowfall. The sky deepened into dusk. The boy placed the Bible near the stove, where its cover could feel the warmth. He lay down, wrapped in the old quilt, the letter folded inside his pocket like a promise. As he drifted into sleep, he dreamed of a hand reaching toward him through falling snow, not to take him away, but to lead him home. And for the first time in many nights, he slept without fear. The storm came back that night. It started as a whisper in the trees, a sigh that deepened until the forest howled like something alive and grieving. Snow slammed against the windows, clawing at the glass with icy fingers. The cabin moaned under its weight, Oldwood complaining in its sleep. The boy stirred, clutching the quilt closer. Ash lifted his head, ears flicking toward the sound, a low growl rumbling from his throat. But the fire still burned. Its light pulsed across the walls like a slow heartbeat, steady and reassuring. The boy sat up, rubbed his eyes, and fed it a few pieces of wood. The sparks rose like fireflies, small spirits ascending to the unseen. That was when he saw it again, the drawer. It sat open now, though he remembered closing it before sleep. Inside, the Bible lay where he had left it, but something new glimmered faintly beneath the pages, a flash of metal in the firelight. He hesitated. Then, with a small breath, he reached inside. It was a small key, rusted but still shaped with care. It felt warm to the touch, as if it had been waiting for his hand. He looked around the cabin, wondering what it might open. There was no chest, no locked door, only the quiet patience of the walls. Ash followed him as he searched, tail wagging once before resuming its watchful stillness. Behind the stove, beneath a loose plank in the floor, he found a gap, barely wide enough for his fingers. He pried at it. The wood gave way with a soft crack, releasing a smell of earth and time. Beneath the plank lay a small box, its hinges corroded, its lock waiting like a mouth sealed by silence. The key fit perfectly. He turned it, and the lock side open, a sound that felt like the world exhaling after years of holding its breath. Inside, wrapped in cloth that had once been white, lay a folded letter, a small silver cross, and a wooden toy soldier missing an arm. The boy touched the cross first. It was smooth, worn down by years of fingers. He closed his hand around it, and for a moment the wind outside seemed to pause. Then he unfolded the letter. "My son, if you ever find this, know that you are already forgiven. I built this cabin for you, for us, so you would have a place to return when the world forgets your name. If I do not come back, let this be your shelter, and may the fire you light here remind you that love can outlast even war. There is no distance too great for mercy. Your father." The words blurred as his eyes filled. He pressed the paper to his lips. He could not stop shaking, from the cold, from the ache, from something deeper. Ash whined softly, resting his head on the boy's knee. "I never had a father," the boy whispered, voice breaking. "But maybe he wrote this for someone like me." He read the letter again. Each line felt alive, not written to a single person, but to anyone who had ever been lost, hungry, and unnamed. The boy folded it gently, as though returning a soul to its body. He placed it back in the box, alongside the toy soldier and cross, then held all three against his chest. Outside, the storm softened, its rage spent. The pines whispered again, this time not in grief, but in prayer. Hours passed. The boy sat near the fire, staring into the flames, the letter's words echoing inside him like a hymn. There is no distance too great for mercy. He wondered if his mother could hear him now. If God could. He began to speak softly, his voice trembling with the effort of belief. "Please," he said, "if you're still there, let me know I'm not alone. Just something. A sign." The wind hushed, and in the quiet that followed, the fire shifted. A log fell inward, releasing a shower of sparks that drew the shape of a cross before disappearing into air. The boy gasped. For a long time, he did not move. He only watched as the last spark faded into darkness, leaving behind a thin trail of smoke that rose and curled, like a prayer that had learned how to climb. Ash lifted his head again and barked once toward the window, sharp, certain, as though answering someone unseen. The boy smiled through his tears. "Maybe that's the sign," he whispered. "Maybe it was here all along." He placed the cross beside the Bible, the letter inside its pages, and the toy soldier on the table. Then he lay down again, one hand resting on Ash's fur. Outside, dawn was beginning to press against the edges of night, a thin silver light, tender and shy. For the first time since the war began, the boy no longer feared the morning. He had found not only shelter, but a story, one that reminded him that faith is not about being found, but about never stopping the search. The morning came softly, like a promise whispered before dawn. Snow rested on the windowsills, unmoving, untouched. The storm had passed, leaving behind a silence so pure it almost hurt. Inside the cabin, the fire's last embers glowed faintly, breathing red among the gray. The boy sat beside them, his blanket drawn tight, the letter open on his knees. Ash slept near the stove, his paws twitching in dreams. Outside, a bird called once, a thin, uncertain sound that broke the long quiet like the first word after prayer. The boy traced the lines of the letter with his finger, mouthing each word as though they could lead him home. "There is no distance too great for mercy." The sentence stayed with him like a heartbeat. He had read it so many times that he knew every curve of the handwriting, every place where the ink had bled like tears into the paper. And yet, something tugged at him, as if the letter still hid another secret, something the writer had left behind. He turned the paper over. Nothing. Then, as the light shifted, he noticed it, a faint ridge along the seam, where two sheets had been glued together. The edges were brittle, but his fingers were careful. He worked slowly, peeling back the corner until a small folded page slipped free, almost weightless. He held it up to the light. The handwriting was smaller, hurried, as if written in the final moments of hope. "To the one who finds this, perhaps you are my son, or perhaps you are only lost as I once was. Whoever you are, know this. Every act of kindness echoes further than we can see. I prayed that this place would become a refuge for whoever needed it most. Not a house, but a haven. If you read these words, then my prayer was answered. Keep the fire burning, stranger. Someone else will need its light after you." The boy stopped breathing for a moment. His eyes filled until the words blurred and shimmered like stars seen through tears. He folded the letter back into the Bible, and for the first time he wept, not from hunger nor fear, but from the unbearable gentleness of being remembered by someone he had never met. He pressed the Bible to his chest. "Thank you," he whispered, "for the fire, for this place, for this mercy." Ash lifted his head and barked once, as if saying amen. The wind outside stirred again, carrying the scent of pine and distant smoke, human smoke. The boy rose, heart thudding. He went to the window, and there it was, a faint gray line curling upward from the next valley. A campfire. People. He turned back to the cabin. The warmth, the letters, the cross. All of it felt like a heartbeat that belonged to something larger than him. He wanted to stay, but he knew the letters' meaning. Keep the fire burning for whoever comes next. He crouched beside the stove, added the last of the wood, and watched the flames rise again. Their light touched every corner of the room. The Bible, the wooden bird, the toy soldier, the old chair. Each thing seemed alive, breathing together. He took one last piece of bread, tore it in half, and placed the smaller piece beside Ash's paws. "For you," he said softly, "for finding me." Then he slipped the letter and the cross into his pocket. Before leaving, he turned once more to look around the cabin. It didn't feel empty anymore. It felt full of voices he could not hear but somehow understood. He closed his eyes, and in the stillness, it seemed as if the fire spoke to him. Not in words, but in warmth. "Go. You are ready." He opened the door. Cold air rushed in, but it no longer bit. It simply embraced. The forest waited, bright and endless. The world was still broken, but not hopeless. He took one step out, then another, his boots crunching into the untouched snow. Ash trotted beside him, tail wagging, nose lifted toward the smell of life. Halfway down the path, the boy turned back. Smoke rose from the chimney, his fire still alive. It curled upward like a thread of faith, thin but unbroken, carrying with it the story of a child, a father, and a miracle hidden in the heart of winter. He whispered to the wind, "Someone else will need your light after me." And the forest answered, a long, slow exhale through the pines, gentle as a blessing. Morning came quietly, not as an event, but as a kindness. It unfolded over the forest like a breath, melting the hard edges of night. Frost glittered on the branches, and sunlight slipped between the pines in long golden stripes, brushing the world awake. The boy walked through the snow, his steps slow, measured. The cold bit at his cheeks, but inside, something warm and alive had begun to grow, a steady flame he carried from the cabin's hearth. Ash padded beside him, nose low to the ground, tail swaying lazily. Each breath the boy exhaled turned into a small cloud, dissolving behind him like forgotten sorrow. The valley stretched ahead, silent and endless. He followed the faint trail of smoke he'd seen from the cabin. The air smelled of pine resin, wood smoke, and something else, life. By midday he saw it, a figure moving through the white, tall, wrapped in a heavy coat, a shepherd's staff in hand. At first, the boy froze. His heart thudded against his ribs, unsure whether to run or wave. The world had taught him to fear footsteps other than his own. The man stopped too, squinting against the glare. Then he called out, his voice deep and kind, echoing across the frozen air. "Boy, what are you doing out here alone?" The sound of words, human words, struck the boy like sunlight after years underground. He swallowed hard, unable to answer. The man came closer, his face weathered and lined, his beard frosted white. Across his back, a bundle of firewood. At his side, a flask swinging gently. When he saw the boy's thin frame and the dog at his feet, his expression softened. "By heaven," he murmured, "you look like you came out of the snow itself." The boy tried to speak. I found a cabin," he managed. His voice cracked like thin ice. "Up in the woods." The man nodded slowly. "A cabin." His eyes darkened for a moment. "There's only one old cabin left in those hills. Been empty since the war. You stayed there alone." The boy hesitated, then said softly, "Not alone. There was warmth. And a letter." The shepherd's gaze lingered on him, curious, reverent. "A letter." The boy nodded. "From a father to his son." He said, "Whoever finds this, you are not forgotten." The man's lips parted, but no sound came out. His hand trembled slightly on the staff. "That cabin," he said after a long pause, voice thick, "that was my brother's home. He built it before he was taken by the war. I didn't know his words ever found anyone." The boy lowered his eyes. "They found me." For a moment neither spoke. The wind moved gently through the trees, stirring the snow into soft halos of light. The man finally placed a hand on the boy's shoulder. Rough, warm, steady. Then maybe, he said, his prayer was answered after all. He brought the boy to a small shepherd's camp in the valley. A few goats grazed among the rocks, and smoke curled from a low stone hut. Inside, the warmth hit like grace. The man poured milk into a tin cup and handed it over. "Drink," he said. Slowly, the boy obeyed. The milk was warm and sweet, the first real taste of comfort in weeks. He felt it reach deep inside, thawing places he didn't know were frozen. Ash curled near the hearth, content. The shepherd sat across from him, watching with quiet affection. "Sometimes," he said, "God hides blessings in ruins. People pass them by, thinking they're empty. But you went inside." The boy smiled faintly. It didn't feel empty. "No," the man agreed. "It never was." That night, the boy lay near the hearth while the wind murmured outside. He took the folded letter from his pocket, opened it once more, and read the final line under the glow of firelight. "Keep the fire burning, stranger. Someone else will need its light after you." He looked at the shepherd sleeping across the room, his staff leaning beside him like a silent sentinel. Then he looked at the small fire, its light flickering across the stones. For the first time, he understood. The letter was not only a message from a father to a son, it was a chain of mercy, passed through time, from one weary soul to the next. The fire did not belong to him. It belonged to all who had ever needed warmth, to all who ever would. He lay back, the letter clutched to his chest, and whispered into the shadows, "Thank you for sending someone." The flames seemed to bow in answer, and outside, as the snow fell gently, the world felt a little less lonely. By dawn, the valley was silver. The first light of morning spilled across the hills, washing the snow in soft gold. Smoke rose from the shepherd's chimney, curling like a ribbon of grace toward the sky. The boy woke before the man, quiet as the light itself. Ash stirred beside him, lifting his head and yawning, his breath fogging in the cold air. The boy slipped from under the blanket and walked outside. The world smelled of pine and thawing earth. Above him, the clouds drifted slow and pale, like angels crossing a quiet heaven. He held the letter in one hand, the small silver cross in the other. Both were cold, but their touch steadied him. The cabin waited somewhere behind him, hidden by forest and snow. Yet he could still feel its warmth, as if the fire he left inside still breathed, its glow threading through the woods, calling softly after him. He turned toward the trees. For a moment, he thought he heard a voice. Not a word, but a sound, something between wind and memory. He closed his eyes. "You are not forgotten." He smiled. "I know," he whispered. The shepherd stepped out a few moments later, boots crunching through the frost. "You're up early," he said. The boy nodded, his gaze fixed on the horizon. "I have to go back," he said. The man frowned gently. "Back? To the cabin?" The boy nodded again. "Someone else will need it." The letter said to keep the fire burning. The shepherd studied him for a long moment, then smiled faintly, the kind of smile that carries both sadness and pride. "Then I'll help you," he said. "We'll bring wood, enough to last whoever comes next." And so they did. By noon, they reached the cabin. It stood silent but strong, snow piled against its sides like white shoulders. The door creaked open under the boy's hand, welcoming him home. The fire had long since died, but the ashes still held warmth, faint as a heartbeat under the surface. Together, they stacked new logs inside the stove. The shepherd struck a match. The flame caught instantly, a small, trembling light, but alive. They sat in silence as the fire grew. The shepherd turned to him. "You've done something good here, boy. Something most people spend a lifetime searching for." The boy looked into the flames. "I didn't do it," he said softly. The fire was already waiting. The man nodded, eyes glistening. Maybe that's how faith works. Before they left, the boy placed the letter back into the drawer beneath the bed, the same place he had found it. He added a small piece of paper of his own, torn from an old notebook the shepherd had given him. His handwriting was clumsy, uneven, but full of intent. To the next one who finds this place, there is still light. Keep it burning. You are not alone. He placed it gently beside the old letter, closed the drawer, and whispered a prayer into the still air. May this house keep its warmth, even when no one's here. The wind seemed to rise in answer. Low, kind, ancient. Ash barked once, tail wagging as if sealing the prayer with joy. As they walked back toward the valley, the boy looked over his shoulder one last time. Smoke had begun to rise again from the chimney. Slow, certain, unwavering. It reached high above the treetops, where it met the wind and scattered into light. He stopped, closed his eyes, and whispered to the sky, "Thank you for the fire, for the mercy, and for finding me." The wind caught his words and carried them upward, threading them through the pines, across the valley, and far beyond the mountains, a prayer without end. And somewhere, perhaps in heaven, the Father smiled. In the quiet of that forgotten forest, one small fire continued to burn, not just in the cabin, but in every heart that still believes mercy can outlast the cold. If this story touched your heart, please subscribe to the channel and tell us where you're listening from. It's our dream to reach 1,000 souls who still believe that light can live even in the darkest winters. Evergreen Tree Refugee Child found an old cabin in the woods. What was inside changed his life forever. A tale of mercy, memory, and the eternal fire of hope.